Well, this Lent season, we've been looking at a series of parables found in Luke's gospel. And we're not looking at all the parables. We're only looking at a few. But we started with the parable of the Good Samaritan. We then went to the parable of the rich fool, then the prodigal son. Last week, Trey gave a great sermon on the parable of the widow and the unjust judge. That is not an easy parable to preach on, and he did a great job. And today we move further ahead in Luke 18 to the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Jesus tells the story about two men, a Pharisee and a tax collector. They go up to the temple to pray. The Pharisee stood by himself and said, "God, I thank you that I am not like other people. I'm better than them. I'm not like the thieves and the rogues and the adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income." Basically, this guy is rattling off to God how good he is and all the good deeds that he does. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven. He was beating his chest and saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, Jesus said, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. Two men in this story, both religious, both going to the temple to pray, but approaching God with completely different attitudes and mindsets. Anytime I preach on humility, I love to think of that story about Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was a great boxer, and back when he was in his prime, he was getting on an airplane, and stewardess walked up and said, "Mr. Ali, would you please buckle your seatbelt?" And Ali looked back at her and said, "Ma'am, Superman don't need no seatbelt." And without missing a beat, the stewardess said, "Well, Mr. Ali, Superman don't need no airplane either." He was humbled. Life has a way of humbling us when we least expect it. Almost 2 months ago, I lost a very close friend and mentor, a guy by the name of Clayton McWhorter. Clayton was a member of this church for many years. He was a leader in Nashville, a leader in the healthcare industry, a pillar in the healthcare industry. But he was also a mentor and like a father to me for the years that I have been in this town. We were very close. And when I came to Nashville almost 9 years ago, he took me in and he spent time with me. And he imparted a lot of his wisdom on life and family relationships. At his funeral on January the 28th, that was held at Belmont University, I talked about David Brooks's concept of resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And you all have heard me mention this book time and time again since last May. Resume virtues are the skills that we bring to the marketplace, the things that we learn in school, the things that help get us jobs and that help us progress in our careers. Resume virtues are very important in terms of upward mobility and economic opportunity. Brooks says that resume virtues drive what he calls the Adam 1 part of our nature. And then eulogy virtues are the things that preachers talk about at our funeral. And these are not necessarily tied to resume virtues. It's whether you're kind and loving and devoted to your family and compassionate, whether or not you're a person of character and integrity. And Brooks says this is what drives the Adam 2 part of our nature. Adam 1, he says, is the resume Adam that wants to build and create and produce and discover things. Adam 1 wants to have high status and win victories. Adam 1 feeds our pride and our ego, makes us competitive, keeps us wanting to beat other people. But Adam 2 wants to have a serene inner character, a quiet but solid sense of right and wrong, not only to do good in the world, but to be good. Adam 2 calls us to love intimately, to sacrifice self in the service of others, to live in obedience to some transcendent truth, to have a cohesive and inner soul that honors creation and its own possibilities. Adam 2 is about humility. Adam 2 is about the meaningful side of life. The thing that always amazed me about Clayton was that he was able to master both. He was very successful in business and in healthcare and in venture capital, but at the same time, he paid a lot of attention to the subject of character and humility, and he never let his success go to his head. It was a remarkable balance, one that I admired and try to emulate. Clayton was also very wary of overly pious Christians who think that they have it all together, who think that they are superior to other people. In fact, I heard him tell me many times that the worst people to do business with were the born-again Christians. That stuck with me because they talked a good game, but often they didn't follow up. Today, in light of this parable, I want us to think about these topics: pride, ego, arrogance, and humility. I think definitions are helpful. Pride, a high or inordinate opinion of one's own dignity, importance, merit, or superiority, whether it is cherished in the mind or displayed in conduct or behavior. Ego, defined as our sense of self-esteem or self-importance. Arrogance, displaying a sense of overbearing self-worth or self-importance, typically arises from a feeling or assumption of one's superiority towards others. Arrogance is often the result of early negative experiences in life, or it's an attempt to hide insecurity. And humility, a modest opinion or estimate of one's own importance or rank. Andrew Murray is an author who has written extensively on prayer and humility. And this is what he says about humility. Humility is perfect quietness of heart. It is for me to have no trouble, never to be fretted or vexed or irritated or sore or disappointed. It is to expect nothing, to wonder at nothing that's done to me, to feel nothing that's done against me. It is to be at rest when nobody praises me and when I am blamed or despised. It is to have a blessed home in the Lord where I can go in and shut the door and kneel to my Father in secret and be at peace in a deep sea of calmness when all around is trouble. You see, a lot of people think that peace means you have to escape and go away somewhere, but real peace is the peace that you find even in the midst of turmoil and crisis and stress. There's great irony in this parable that needs to be pointed out. The Pharisee, who was viewed as the religious leader of that day, the one who had it all together, the one who everybody else was supposed to follow, he was the one who was arrogant and self-righteous. But the tax collector, who was despised and resented by many in the first century because of what he did for a living, collected taxes, was the one who showed contrition and humility. Once again, we have Jesus turning the common perception and standards of his day upside down in order to teach us a very important lesson. But has it occurred to you that things have not changed a whole lot? There are still very different types of religious people today who go to the temple or to the church to pray. Some are humble, and some are arrogant. Some are forgiving, others judgmental. Some are genuine, others are fake. And so it always makes sense for us to keep wrestling with this important question: what kind of religious person am I? What kind of Christian am I? A lot of us are familiar with the words of the prophet Micah, that beautiful passage that we find in the Old Testament where Micah asks, "What does God require of you?" And he answers the question: to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. And I think we all agree that that's a powerful verse, and I think we'd all agree on, yes, we're called to do justice. There's people building a Habitat house right now. And yes, we're called to love kindness. You know, what difference does the rest of your faith make if you're not kind? But what does it mean to walk humbly with God? What does it mean to live a humble life. We live in a culture where pride and ego and arrogance run rampant, and where we constantly seek and thrive on the praise and the affirmation of other people. We want others to affirm us. We want others to like us. We want others to think fondly of us. We want others to feel like we are important and that we matter. We like to be told how great we are. We want to be significant. We want to live a life of significance. But the dilemma, as I see it, is this: how can we live in a world that worships achievement and success, accomplishment and prestige, money and power, social media and self-promotion, and yet maintain a strong sense of humility in our lives? How can we work hard to get an education and to get a good job and to progress in our careers and to take care of our families and our loved ones, yet remain humble in the process? This is a challenge for each and every one of us. And it's not a one-time challenge. It's a lifelong challenge that we struggle with. To not live as though we have all of the answers. I don't have all the answers. In fact, I can be wrong a lot of times. But to not live our lives as though we have it all figured out, because we're human and we don't. I've talked before about two different kinds of pride. I think that there's healthy pride. And healthy pride is pride in your family, pride in your marriage, pride in your job, pride in your appearance, pride in your character and your behavior, pride in having integrity and being honest. And then there's unhealthy pride. And unhealthy pride is basically grounded in the idea that I'm God's gift to the world and the world would be really big trouble without me. Unhealthy pride is wrapped up in ego and arrogance. And this is the pride that we're called to battle. The world is full of people that are insecure. And it's also full of people that are arrogant. And neither extreme is healthy. And so the goal is to be somewhere in the middle, where we have self-confidence and where we take pride in who we are, but we don't cross over that line and become arrogant and condescending and pretend that we're better than other people. C.S. Lewis once said that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's just thinking about yourself less. Thomas Merton said, pride makes us artificial, but humility makes us real. Hemingway said, the goal is not to be superior to other people. The goal is to be superior to your former self. And Rick Warren said, you cannot exalt God and yourself at the same time. For every single one of us, being human means struggling with this battle between pride and humility, between ego and humility. And it's constant. We never master it. Arrogance is a turnoff. It's a sign of insecurity. It's also unchristian because Christ was humble. He didn't exalt himself. He lived a humble life. He served others. He died a humble death on a cross. And being humble is not always easy. And frankly, a lot of times the world will run over humble people. Look at how Jesus' life ended. Henry Nouwen is a great spiritual author, and he wrote a book called The Selfless Way of Christ, Downward Mobility in the Spiritual Life. I found this book fascinating. He talks about the distinction between the way of the world and the way of Jesus. He talks about upward mobility, and we're all familiar with that, something that we know. He says our whole way of living is structured around climbing the ladder of success and making it to the top. Our very sense of vitality is dependent upon being part of the upward pull and upon the joy provided by the rewards that are given on the way up. Remember Craddock's story about the greyhound? Fred was so creative Talked about going to visit his daughter in California, and she had a greyhound as a pet, and so Fred struck up a conversation with the greyhound, used to race, said, "You race anymore?" "No, I don't race anymore." "Well, what's the matter? Did you get hurt?" "No, I didn't get hurt." "What's wrong? Are you crippled? You can't win?" "No, I win. I've won a lot of prizes." "Well, what's the matter? Why don't you race?" And the dog looked at him and said, "I quit." He said, "You quit?" "I quit." "Why'd you quit?" "I quit because I figured out that after all those years of running around the track and competing and going and going and going, I was chasing a fake rabbit the entire time." What are the fake rabbits that we chase in our lives over and over and over again? In our culture of upward mobility, so much of what we chase and so much of what we believe will make us happy doesn't. And Christ reminds us of what is real and what matters. Then now one talks about downward mobility. He says this is the way of Jesus. He says, God revealed himself as a small, helpless child, as a refugee in Egypt, as an obedient adolescent, an inconspicuous adult, as a preacher from Galilee, followed by some simple fishermen, as a man who ate with sinners and talked with strangers, as an outcast, a criminal, a threat to his people. He moved from power to powerlessness, from greatness to smallness, from success to failure, from strength to weakness, from glory to iniquity. The whole life of Jesus of Nazareth, Henry Nouwen says, is a life in which all upward mobility was resisted. And Nouwen also says that somewhere deep in our hearts, we already know that success and fame and influence and power and money do not give us the inner joy that we're looking for. They do not satisfy us in the deep, meaningful ways that we're hungry for. And we know this, and yet time and time again, we keep coming back to the fake rabbit. There are two men in this parable, Luke's gospel. One is prideful, one is humble. One is self-righteous, the other is honest. One is judgmental, the other is apologetic. Which one are we? Which do we resonate with? Do we think that we are better than other people? Or are we willing to honestly acknowledge our flaws and our shortcomings and the fact that we don't have all the answers and earnestly ask for God's mercy and God's forgiveness? Paul writes to the Philippians, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born of human likeness, and being found in human form. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." Christians are called to be humble because Christ was humble. And being humble doesn't mean weak. It just means that you're more concerned about other people than you are about yourself. And in this world in which we live, that is becoming more and more challenging and rare. Once heard a speaker at a conference say, if you had to just sum up one word to send, to sum up Christianity, in addition to the word love, the word would be others, others. Micah tells us what the Lord requires. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. Jesus says all who humble themselves will be exalted, all who exalt themselves will be humble. This is still wisdom that our world desperately needs. Amen.